in everything in life, there's just huge choice. And now that really seems to be coming into funerals. It's been in weddings for quite a while, this expansive of all the options, and now, of course, that's grown in funerals. People seem very unaware of it still.
Welcome to Death, a Changing Industry. Today with a great pleasure to welcome Grace Jevons, the CEO of the Association of Independent Celebrants. Grace, thank you so much for joining us. A huge pleasure and privilege to talk to you today and unpick your minds, all things civil celebrants and your worlds. So firstly then, about you, how did you get involved in becoming a civil celebrant?
I kind of thought I would either be a vicar or a funeral director or a lorry driver.
Okay.
Yeah.
Some range.
Some range. Or maybe a nun. Okay. I went to a convent for a short time and nuns fascinated me, but yeah, that wasn't my role. As a teen, I thought I might be a humanist because that seemed to be the only way to do. It was basically more about the funerals, but doing weddings and funerals.
Yep.
Being there at that point of people's lives and events and all that sort of thing. Living in rural Devon, before the internet, you had to go to the library to look stuff up. Didn't really pursue the humanist thing because the avenues weren't obviously available to me. So yeah, years later, doing lots of different jobs. I'm glad because it's given me such a wealth of experience mostly with different kinds of people.
Yeah, life, just general life.
Yeah, life, and of course people are a big part of that. And I was in one of those jobs where you think, God, I'm doing all right here. And I've got an aptitude. It was covert video work for a customer, for big companies who wanted us to go out and video test staff out on new training things, on new products and things. And but I wasn't getting anywhere, and a younger girl below me was being promoted, and it all just really think, I'm at one of those crossroads.
Yeah.
Just hand that notice in and quit and go for it. So on their computer, I was looking up the courses for training. I don't know why it came into my mind again to do it. Anyway, there was the course up in Northampton, up near here, and civil ceremonies, and yeah, just handed in that notice, got the place on the training. Did them very quickly because somebody dropped out, so I did the weddings and families and the funerals back to back. 5 weeks later. It's nothing like, and I was a single parent, so there's nothing like not having an income to motivate you to get back out there and get earning.
When was that? How long ago did you?
So that was in 2018.
Okay.
Yeah. And
because the reason why I asked the question is because we have seen this huge increase, a movement towards civil ceremonies.
Yes, and that's really happened in that time that I started. Because when I started, there was no one in my area. There was one lady in Plymouth that had been doing it for years.
Yeah.
There was a few around, there was a few in Exeter, but literally 2 or 3.
Yeah. And so what's interesting, you were interested in becoming a humanist at a young age, and it feels like civil ceremonies or civil celebrant came through and it kind of met the needs of a personalised service without a rigid structure, but you can still incorporate some religion as well. So like, why do you think there's been an explosion of and an increase in popularity in civil ceremonies? Why is that? Yeah,
it's interesting to know why. Because obviously humanists have been around for a long time.
Yep.
And it was that you either had your local minister because you went to church, or your family were of a faith, generally obviously C of E. The alternative was humanist. That was the organisation that was not set up for it because they are a belief system of their own, but they were doing that work for the non-religious service. It's kind of a split thing, because one is that some families, they'll say to the arranger or the funeral director, oh no, I don't want a religious service. And so the celebrant gets sent in. Sometimes, I guess years ago, the humanist would have just been the choice, but there's more celebrants now. And they get sent in, and then the family say, oh no, I want the Lord's Prayer, and I'd like at least 2 hymns.
Yeah.
And quite a sort of a touching on religious faith committal. Oh, okay. And sometimes some of us would say, are you sure you don't want a minister for this, when they start lots of readings? I ask people if they haven't expressed their faith choice. I ask them, and was there a faith, more spiritual belief, or Church of England background? And then that really influences how I write that committal. I mean, in everything in life, there's just huge choice. And now that really seems to be coming into funerals. It's been in weddings for quite a while, this expansive of all the options, and then now, of course, that's grown in funerals. People seem very unaware of it still. The fact that you can have a celebrant, the fact that you can have a multitude of urns, of ashes going up in fire, all the things that we would see. They still need to be told that. They're not always necessarily aware, but somewhere this thing of choice has come into their mind.
With this as well, because I'm interested with a civil wedding, we can't incorporate religion, is that correct?
So you might have, it's very unusual. I have certainly never had at any of my weddings an inclusion of a prayer, any kind of a blessing, but it would be more of a spiritual blessing. It wouldn't be any sort of religious connotation.
Because I was under the impression it's actually not allowed, and it's because it's an actual contract for a wedding, whereas a funeral, because it's not a contract, that's why a civil ceremony can incorporate the Lord's Prayer or a hymn.
Yeah, I've never had it. I think people that, because with weddings it's very sort of, there's obviously a church wedding and that the man or the woman or the girl or boy, they've decided that's the church wedding, either for romantic reasons or for faith reasons. And then the civil, people that go for civil, it seems to be very much, it's nothing to do with faith or religion, unless it's more like a pagan sort of ham fasting type of a wedding. In that case, there might be elements of blessings and things, and like I say, that's nothing to do with Church of England or anything like that.
Okay.
The funerals, there really is that split. And I think what has happened is actually, it's kind of like word of mouth is the best kind of marketing. So of course, every time you have a civil celebrant taking a service in a crematorium or whatever chapel space, that many people, because sometimes you can have 200 people in a chapel, they're all seeing, and then they're realising, and then someone else passes, and then we have this amazing celebrant, you could go down that route. So,
with that as well, do you think we're shifting now as well, that change towards a celebration of someone's life, where traditionally that wasn't perhaps the case, and through a celebrant you can really express that in a better way? Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, I think so. Although, you probably met them yourself, you get some really jolly vicars.
Yes, yeah.
And I just think there's nothing, I still really love when you have that lovely jolly vicar, and there's lots of them around still. They really put a lot of effort into their services. Yes, it's, there's elements of the religious, it's a liturgy, it's a set thing. I think that's what's missing as well, is that less people go to church, so those ministers don't know you. You don't have that link like you do with your GP or your teacher at school, or your,
it's that community which was always there. You knew the vicar before someone passed away or someone died, before the wedding, whereas now, like you say, less people are going to church, so due to that there's less of a connection, and therefore it's more open to other ideas.
I kind of can't help thinking that if there was still that community aspect and the vicar was one of those, even if you didn't go to church, you would probably know who the vicar was. And you would see them in the village, or you'd see them in the town, and I think some more people would still go to that service.
A local vicar to us, Gary Ward, incredible man, ex-prison guard, midwife, and he also pours pints in a local pub in the village. And like you say, in the community, he's so well known and well thought of because of that. He's integrated into the community, and that's what I think. So you can blame society for being detached, but then can we also blame vicars for not doing enough in their communities? But Gary Ward is totally integrated. I think he's an example, and it works both ways.
Yeah, I think so. And these are so there's a few shifts taking place as to why we are where we are. I just think we seem to be getting to a peak as well of people feeling that religion and faith is irrelevant to them, that God doesn't exist, or God might exist but is irrelevant. So on the one side you've got that shift, but on another side, so many people really becoming, a more spiritual awakening sort of a thing is happening for a huge number of people.
So you are the CEO of the Association of Independent Celebrants, as well as a civil celebrant in your own right. So you're a busy person. The role as CEO, though, of the AOIC, obviously it's a growing association. What is the vision? What is the mission of that association? What are you there for?
So ultimately, we are there to really support our members. In funeral homes, you have a team. When you're a celebrant, there's just one of you. There are a couple that have their partners as admin or helping out or whatever, but generally you are a lone business. And you're dealing with a lot of stuff. In the wedding side of it, it can be quite chaotic, and you're just on your own. But the funerals is the big thing because of the bereavement aspect. We're finding that there's like an increased amount of anxiety or fear or anger or all sorts of stuff seems to be going on. Yeah, all sorts seems to be going on in society today. I mean, you just only have to watch the news for 2 minutes to completely panic yourself. And it's such an intimate thing that you're going into with this family when somebody close to them has just died and they're letting you into their home, and then within minutes they're letting you into their lives, and you're working quite intensely with them for a week, generally 2 weeks, sometimes 3 weeks, and it's so intense. And then that funeral happens, and then it kind of doesn't exist anymore. So celebrants are dealing with a lot at the minute. And also for the funeral directors and the public, there's the element of the complaints policy and procedure. If for any reason it ever does go wrong, or there's something that a family's upset or disgruntled about, there's a backstop there. We're the only association that is actually a trade association.
Yeah.
There are a few others that are sort of training schools that have come through, and then they keep a membership. And so we're the only one that's sort of not for profit, and rapidly growing. We have shot up in numbers. We're getting up to 600 now, which is and crikey, I remember when I joined the committee a few years ago, I think we had like 180 members. The committee members, it was quite a small committee then, and they had to put in their subs like a month early or something to pay whatever it was.
Get you through.
Yeah, it was a bit like that. And it was run out of one of the members' one of their bedrooms, and then it's grown and grown and grown.
Well, I'm interested as well. We talked about community before in your areas, in areas across the country, and how the church had that community. So it's before someone died, or before the wedding, before the christening. But then afterwards, I'm interested in that from a civil celebrant point of view. Is there anything in place for civil celebrants to look after people after a funeral service? Is there a mechanism or a network they can provide to help people more? Because if we're increasing the amount of civil funerals in the UK, is that aftercare? Are there any thoughts there at all?
So it's kind of just, there's nothing set up in a sense, but there are, those families that they just need that little check-in.
Yeah.
Or they just need that little bit more. Or what we're very careful to not be, and to make sure that our members are not trying to be, is bereavement counsellors.
Yes.
Some of them are trained in that, and they have the capacity to use that. I'm trained in spiritual counselling, so I have found that I can fall into that, or utilise that for my families. It's very much on a personal basis that you sense that family might just need a check-in, and things like at Christmas time, they'll be the ones that remember the birthday that's coming up, the anniversary of the death is coming up, and they will make contact with their family.
It's good.
And just check in.
Yeah, it's good.
And that's all it needs sometimes. There was a girl, her husband disappeared. She's not very old, and she's got 5 or 7 children. He disappeared for a couple of days, and then he was found dead. And it was all of the unknown, and not just organising funeral, but what had happened to him, where he'd been, and how this had come about. And of course, she's left with these, a sizable number of children on her own. And I just checked in with her, something, and it's fine because it just that person just springs into your mind, and straight away I'm like, and there's some numbers that I save. I don't usually do it, but there are some where you just save that name and that number, because you've said to them, any time, and I mean any time,
Yeah.
because sometimes they don't need you until 6 months later or 12 months later, or the anniversary hits and they're building up to it and they might just reach out very rarely, but yeah, I checked in with her. I checked in with this girl, and straight away in the response I had, I knew that that just made all the difference, just knowing she'd cut off from family members of his. Didn't sound like it was going too well with her family, but she basically said that, just to know that someone else is out there thinking of me.
Yeah.
And that's all that's needed sometimes, give them
yeah.
a little boost.
No, that's good.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting about the aftercare and how you're there for people to meet their needs. Your work as a celebrant, as a civil celebrant, can you give any examples on how you have changed the course of their lives from a grief point of view, from the work that you've done? So how you've empowered them, given that family control again with their funeral arrangements or with the actual funeral itself, and seen a shift from where they start from to where they finish to, or where they go on to. Can you get any examples?
Yeah,
of that?
I quickly learned that families are they can get very anxious before you arrive at their house for that first meeting. I guess they're worried about what you think of their home. Are you going to make any judgments on that? Am I going to be able to answer the questions? Do I know the answers? And you go in there and you just gently start. I just start with the basic things, details on the job sheet. And then you soon know whether they're going to go through, let you lead the process, or whether they're just going to start with the stories and the memories. And so you adapt your process and you just feel it in the room. They just relax. And it's a bit like that through the whole process. So those initial conversations, you must have seen it about the talking about the nitty gritty. Do you want that curtain to close?
Yeah.
How are you going to feel? Do you want me to do all the talking, or could you imagine? Oh, I don't think I can. I don't know. I don't even know how I'm going to be on the day because of my emotion. Well, what's worrying you? Well, I might cry. And you're like, okay, well, that's fine, because everyone's going to be expecting that.
Yeah.
And
you're allowed to cry.
And actually, the people at the back are going to go, oh, look at her crying up the front. Oh, she didn't read that poem very well, did she? Because she's, losing it. And so you start realising, God, I'm almost like pushing them towards this day.
You're carrying people.
Yeah. But at the beginning, it feels like not you're pushing, because you're not pushing, but that day is coming, and you see them. There's resistance here, and there's anxiety there, and there's worry, and then I just have a trust in it now that you're going to get to this day, and they realise the day, and that's what we call crossing a threshold. And if you can pick them up, like you say, and carry them, and really at this point at the funeral day you hold them so gently and tenderly, firmly, because they need holding, some of them really. It's a celebrant thing, it's a sacred celebrant thing, this thing of holding space. Ministers do it, vicars do it. You're holding this family's emotions, and you just think, I know you didn't want to face this day. I know you nobody wants to be here doing this and saying goodbye to that person, but you are faced with it because they died, and that's not changing. Yeah. But let's get them through this.
And what's really interesting, you said when they first meet you, that level of anxiety about the house, but actually I think a big part of it is when you come around the house, or when they meet me for the first time to arrange a funeral, it's actually accepting that this is actually happening, that my loved one has died. And when we come in, or when you go there, it's another step to realise this is happening. And something we talk about on this podcast frequently is about how doing difficult things are also very important.
Yeah, and that's why I say about pushing them, because you think, I just know that I need to get you over this hurdle. And I'm not saying that they're not going to suddenly feel amazing and not miss them and all of that. They're still going to go through that grieving afterwards. Yeah. But if you can set them up on that day for what is to come.
That feeling that when they come out and say that what you did with your voice, actually, as I say, facilitate that space. I believe what has happened you have then created a more positive outcome for them in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, because of the work you've done at that particular and most important point.
Yeah. The other thing that I'm very aware of, I do tend to let it come through me what is right to say for that family. So those closing words, I really tune in to just letting that, type that, because that's the thing where you're sending them off. It's partly those closing words, I think, are letting them have a breather, because the committal's just happened. That's the sort of the ultimate thing in the service, the most emotional point. You've just done the saying goodbye. Some want the curtains closed there, some don't. It's quite a traditional thing. But they've gone through that, and it's just easing them down and giving them a breather to gather themselves before they're going out the door. And basically, loved one is going that way, everyone else is going that way, and that's it. Funerals can affect us in different ways, and things might be loss from a long time ago might be rising anew today, or in the coming weeks. And and you just say some words of comfort and encouragement, or something about that and I've had people come up after and go, yeah, my dad died, we did his funeral 6 months ago, and they're a relative of the person, so they couldn't really not come today to support the rest of their family. And you say, God, that's raw for you today, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you know it is. It's brought it all back. But actually something I've said there has just calmed even that.
Yeah.
They're at this funeral, but they're thinking of that funeral that was so close.
I was just thinking that you're actually acknowledging previous grief as well, and you're actually you're trying to heal.
And it's
grief
within that family group.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes it's somebody that's, a close friend or a neighbour, and they also lost their dad or their whatever a year ago, 2 years ago. Some of this grief people are carrying for so long.
Yeah. For someone now who's bereaved or is going to be bereaved soon, what advice would you give them when they're considering the type of funeral service they should opt for? You've got the hats of a funeral director and also as a civil celebrant. You understand the work that a vicar does. What advice would you give someone who is thinking about funeral arrangements, which direction to go for the funeral service? What would you say to them?
I think my first thing would be is go to a few of your local funeral directors. Because there will be, if budget is a concern, which seems to be a concern for a lot of people, you will be surprised. These amounts that are being bandied about, I know where it's coming from and I know why it's happening, but funerals do not cost £10,000. They don't cost. If you want to spend that, you can easily spend that.
Yeah.
But they just don't. There's ways and means of having a budget-friendly funeral that, yes, there is a professional fee that is set by the funeral director. That's going to be a lot less than you think. Quite often it's the crematorium fees that are going to really stack that up. You're going to be able to visit your loved one in that chapel, even if, say the person's requested a direct cremation. So that's a service without a funeral, without a service. There are still choices within that. You can go to the funeral home and visit them in the chapel of rest and have a personal time to spend with them and say goodbye. Or you can have a direct cremation service whereby you're attending, but there is no service. It might be 10 minutes with music, but if that's in your budget and that's what you want to do. You could have that direct cremation where nobody attends, but you do bring in a celebrant, and be it in your garden or your local pub or your village hall or your whatever, you can have whatever's within your budget. Again, some funeral homes, they will set out a chapel space for you. I was in a funeral home yesterday and we did a full service in their little chapel. There's so many options. And you're probably feeling like, number one, you're in shock. I think even if you've had someone who's with a terminal illness, there's no preparing. You can be prepared to a certain point, you know where it's going. Terminal illness is terminal illness, but when that day comes, even then, I don't think you'll be prepared emotionally. It's so different, and it will just take you how it takes you. And then, of course, your brain goes to mush as well, and you've got people like funeral directors and celebrants asking questions, and I just can't remember it. So, it's just take your time. There's a limit on the registration of the death, if that's a part of what you need to do, which for most it is. Obviously, it's only post-mortem and inquest cases, so majority are, but that's, you know, a local director will just gently take you through those steps, and you think, oh, it's in 2 weeks, it's not enough time, and actually that's quite, you know yourself, that's quite a lot of time, isn't it, that you can get things done, and just gently, you know, don't worry, we'll make it happen.
Yeah, and as you said, to actually gently just carry them through to that point. So what's really interesting about, you said about the costs, and I think that does have a driving force in funeral arrangements now. Like you said, there's some crazy figures being sort of pushed around, which is totally incorrect.
It's another fear tactic.
It's a fear
almost.
tactic.
It's wild.
It's very unfair. And actually, what I would argue and say, some of the most beautiful and special moments I've been involved in funeral arrangements and a funeral service have actually been free of charge. And people think, well, how? And I'll explain. And that is, for example, being creative and how we adapt in the funeral industry as a celebrant or a funeral director. On the way to the crematorium, we went to a lady's stables and we placed her coffin on some trestles in the stables. Her horse came out. The family were all there. The celebrant, who's a good friend of mine, read a poem, said a few words in the stables. There's no additional addition on costs to do those sort of things. And it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Nothing can replicate that. And actually, back to their grief again, that will help them that day, it will help them the following day, in a month's time, and I believe in 10 years' time as well.
Yeah, because it's the memory of that. Did you go on to go and do a service, or was that just the, so that was the start initial, and then you went on. So this is what really scares me. I don't know if scares the right word, but I'm really concerned about this big swing to these direct cremations that are all sound very convenient, it all sounds very easy. Remove
the grief from a funeral.
It's cheap. It's cheaper for those without money, still not cheap, but there's a real cost to this.
But I think though, what you've said though, that if you use your local funeral director, you can still have a direct cremation, an unattended direct cremation, but still have some contact with your loved one, and that still have
Adapt
the celebrant in, have the vicar to come in, see your loved one in the chapel arrest, and that is so important again with your grief. And that's why for me there is a clear connection between grief and bereavements and celebrancy and funerals. And some people I don't think quite understand what the connection is between all this, for me, a wide picture.
There are some there really excellent celebrants, and the way they talk about some of their funeral directors that they work with, you can tell it's a real team. They've really come together, and they can, that funeral director can, number one, know that they can rely on them absolutely, but they also know what they can do in terms of offering families a bit more adaptability in what they can afford or what they really want to achieve on that day, what they want from that day. And of course, the thing is about the direct cremations and these ones with no ceremony, like for that family, and even that horse would so have benefited from that. Humans and horses have such a close bond with each other. That horse would know exactly. Some people might find me odd to say that, but I think we all know people with their dogs. Horses are the same thing. Such a connection.
The horse put its head on the coffin.
Yeah. And you have this with animals. They're not stupid.
But
even if let's say they'd just done that bit in the stable, that alone would have made so much difference down the line.
The healing.
Yeah. So imagine that Nan's died. She was in a home. Everyone lives all over the place now. They don't necessarily live where they come from and where mum or dad, Nan lives. And so she's gone off with the company that she's bought the plan with, and then that's it. There might be a phone number that you can ring, but there's no connection. And I really believe that a big part of this grieving process is not just this funeral here or going to the stables and reading a poem. It's from the time that they walk through your door in the funeral home and they're making the arrangements there, and how they're guided through that. And then if it's a celebrant one or a minister one, but then they go through the next stage with them. And then they've got both funeral home and celebrant or minister looking after them all the way to this day, and then the realising of the day. To me, that is all a part of it.
Yeah, I totally agree.
It's so important. And I don't know if I'm right, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Wasn't it quite like an honoured thing to carry the coffin?
Yeah.
That would have been a real thing. And sometimes people, they page with the hearse to the door of the church or the thing. Those sorts of things would have been, that would have been probably in a village, that would have been a big community affair. So in a small village where I grew up, in the pandemic, no one can go to the service. A big character in the village died. He was the local, not farrier, blacksmith.
Yeah.
Sounds really old school.
I was about to say, this is very...
It does sound really old school. And
Charles
this was only in like 2020, 2021.
Yeah.
Anyway, so they all knew in the village, and it's a one road through coming down this really long hill, flattens out at the bottom for quite a way and then goes up. They lined the entire thing from Zeal Head out to the other side of where the Methodist chapel is. There were people safely spaced.
Yeah, of course.
And they lined the whole thing just to be able to do that. It was,
So what you just discussed there, I talk on this podcast about connection points. And the more connection points we have in place and facilitate, the better we can be as we move forward with our grief. And that's exactly what it is. Carrying the coffin, these are physical connection points. You're actually feeling that weight of your loved one. That's difficult, but it's important.
Yeah.
Standing in the street and having the family see the neighbours there, and it's connection, it's all connection. So my question to you is, how as a society have we become so disconnected? What's happened?
Yeah, I come back again to these direct cremation companies that it's all on the telly, it's in the papers, there's leaflets coming through. They've had to stop cold calling now because laws changed. That seems to have had such a power because they're getting into people's homes. There's all this talk of the financial crisis and cost of living crisis. Again, it's all this ramping up of fear in people's minds.
It's like the funeral industry. We're just gently there to guide you and support you. We're like a soft service there to take care of you. When I say soft, I mean caring service. We're there, our hearts are there to serve you. And it's almost like an aggressive tactic has come through and just torn straight through the middle of it.
Yeah, so that aggressive tactic, the thing that's built up to that, I would say, is that nothing has become immune from the power of marketing. So this was a thing that really started growing in probably before that, but definitely in the 50s, post-war, as I understand it, from social history. This thing of marketing a product has come through.
Yeah. And
then obviously services, how you market services, that's come into that. So this is, and then there's the power of, TV, and
social
they
media.
say and then that's ramped it up even more, hasn't it? That there isn't a minute of the day that you're not being bombarded in one way or another by a branding, by a marketing, by a message, by this, by that. And funerals have just now come under that umbrella as well. It still comes back to this shift socially from those little church communities. Even if you didn't go to church, the church would be running a summer fete and you'd probably go to that. The church would be running Christmas bingo or Easter bingo, you'd probably be going to that. It was such a and the local
community
school might
space.
be,
It's a community
it really
space,
did a
essential
lot more than I think
space.
people realised.
Yeah.
And so this thing and telly and marketing and that, it's just created a thing where people in their own homes, and then that's it, telly goes on, advert, everything's, but it's so become consumed, people getting cut off. Also the thing with the grieving, and I don't know if this is the PC thing and the political, no one can be offended, no one wants to be upset anymore, everyone's got to be careful, and it's almost like grief has gone into that as well. We want to park that because that's in with that offence and hard emotion difficult stuff, park it there.
We don't want to do difficult things now, but as I keep saying on this podcast as well, difficult things are really important things.
So something that's completely unrelated to death, When I was a teen at school, we did a thing called 10 tours. There's kids all around the country that train for 10 tours. It's a 35, 45 or 55 mile walk over Dartmoor, over rugged terrain, out in all weathers. It has snowed. It's in May, but it has snowed on that weekend before. And all these teenagers, they train at school and cadet forces and stuff, and they all come on the Friday. Saturday morning, woof, they're off, and they see how long they take to get back in on the Sunday. And it's a huge physical challenge. It's a bunch of kids, there's probably like 5 or 6 in a team, and off you go. You've got to navigate your way around in all sorts of weathers on this tough terrain. And just to get to that race, all your training through the year, and you're camping out on the moor and you're probably freezing because you're doing this training all year round. It doesn't just happen in the summer. And you're really awed, like I did the cadets as well. And there's experiences in there that you are pushed through. You've signed up for it, but you don't really know what to expect. So you say, yeah, this will be good fun. And then suddenly you're out in the moor and it's hailing and you might have lost your way and the team's starting to bicker a bit and one walker's lagging behind. All these things. I can't help thinking that things like national service.
Yeah.
Cool. I don't think they'd get away with bringing it back. But if you were challenged and you went through that challenge at the other end, you're like, oh my God, I did that. And you have a different thing about yourself and your life and your capacity to cope with things.
It's that resilience, and this, the whole purpose of this podcast is to shine a light to say there is another way to do this. With grief, there can be growth. I'm not saying we want to go through grief because that's obviously sadness.
But it's a fact of life.
It is a fact of life. We can't avoid it. Regarding the bereavement awareness in schools, some people have said to me in the past, let kids be kids. But I'm like, well, kids, your kids are already around death. We can't avoid this stuff. And it's about giving society some resilience. Those walks that you went on, those challenges, I guarantee it's anybody who was involved in that, they'll look back on that time with a real fond proudness that they actually achieved that or gave it a go. Because to say tough things are important. We have to acknowledge them, and we can't avoid it. We can't just put it to the carpet and think that'll go away. You can't avoid grief. You can't do it.
I mean, quite a few years ago now, I had a paint your own pottery shop business, and madly I did set that up in recession. It wasn't the best, but the people that went there had a great time, and the business itself and the comments and the feedback, and it was an amazing thing. It was just one of those things. It just didn't work out at that time. But at the same time, I lost a business that I'd built up over 10 years. And it was ahead of its time. It was a fantastic business. We did so well, but we were squeezed out. It was a thing that no one had ever done before. And we were squeezed out of the market that I created by bigger, big boys with lots of money. And so as a knock-on of that, I was really struggling financially. I became homeless with me and my daughter, blah, blah, blah. And it just really, my mental health was terrible. I was really at a rock bottom state. It took me a long time to come out of that. But I look back on literally, it was the worst. There couldn't have been many more things that happened to us. I didn't have a vehicle anymore, had to let that go. It was just everything. And I just look back on that time as blessings now, because I'm pretty bomb-proof as a result of those experiences. And it's the same, that grief thing. You don't want to face it, but actually I always say, just let it flow through you. Harbouring it as well, it's going to come back to bite you. It's going to cause you illness down the line, or it's going to it's not good for you to hold that grief in.
I think as well, it can change your course of direction in a negative way unless you, like you say, acknowledge it and try and understand what's going on. Again, like people like crying and having bad days, accepting that's acceptable. People just so hard on themselves. Again, we're comparing ourselves to other people, the whole social media
it's very worried about what other people think, and maybe that has come from social media, because we can condition it on social media, can't we, to portray the image that we want to show. Whereas you're in that chapel, the world and his wife might be coming. That's another thing. People worry, they get very anxious about, they don't know who's coming and how many are coming and if they're coming, and And I wonder if that's partly because they think they might be crying and all the rest of it, or is anybody going to come? And then they always have that overwhelming thing. They're like, oh my God, so many people came and it was just really lovely. And they feel really held by their community. And that's just always such a lovely thing to see. I think we can all, because this thing has set in, we can all shy away. Like when someone, your neighbour or one of your friends dies, and you should have gone round to visit or given them a call, or you don't know what to say. I don't know what to say. Well, I really think just ring up and say, do you know what? I can't even begin to manage, and I don't know what to say to you. And even if I'm just calling up to say to you, I don't know what to say to you, but I just wanted to let you know that I am around. I don't know if I can help in any way, but
I care.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's kind of all they need.
That is, yeah, I totally agree.
Well, it's a good start. It's a good start.
I think people want to know that they're being thought about, and that is a very powerful, simple tool. It doesn't require a vast amount of skill to just let someone know you're thinking of them.
No.
But we seem to struggle as a society and nation with that, which I hope we can change. So you're doing amazing work, and it's lovely to hear your insights into, the changes that are taking place, some of which are alarming, but as I say, hopefully these videos and more education, which other people are doing great work on as well, can help people make informed decisions about what they want to do. The whole direct cremation thing, it's important to say, like, you and I, we're not against that at all.
No, it is right for some people, but there's ways of doing it.
Yeah, and just making sure people are aware what they choose.
Yeah.
So your role then at the AOIC, what's the future of that? Where do you want to take it? And in the future, where do you want to see the AOIC?
So the Society of Independent Funeral Directors, and there's the British Institute of Funeral Directors. We've built up stronger links over time, but I would really like to start seeing that working partnership, because of course our association, it's all letters, AOIC and AFD, but within those there are members, and within that these are members of two different things, but they work so closely together in their roles.
Yeah.
And I think there needs to be that coming together to really benefit people.
Make an impact.
Yeah, because it's two things that they are working, and they have to work on the same thing, but they'd be better like that.
Yeah, totally agree.
That's kind of how I feel. And that's a shift that for some, they're used to doing it this way, and they're used to having, it's a thing that's still a bit up in the air, and there are some that have really got like this, and there are some that are still a bit like that, not even like that. But this is the shift of it.
Yeah.
In the same way with the direct cremation companies coming in, I think that direct cremation is not going away. It's right for some people with some budgets, but again, I come back to it. Death is such an important marker in the same way that weddings and births and all those sorts of things are. It's a time of coming together, and there has to be some sort of acknowledgement of that person's life, I personally think, but really also of that grief.
Yeah.
And that passing over, not trying to ignore it. It will find its level.
Yeah.
And there will always be independent funeral directors, and I'd like to think that working together with the funeral homes and the celebrants, people will come to realise, they'll know for themselves through experience that actually some sort of service or ceremony is what we need. Be that with the coffin present or not coffin present, with the horse there, with the dog there, with the whoever there, in your pub, your garden, your house, your hall, a chapel, yeah.
No, well, as I say, I think it's really exciting. The current NAFD president, Barry Pritchard, I know he's working very hard towards this as well, about that sort of working together, uniting all on the same mission. Again, having you in that position that you are, that leadership role, that national leadership role at the AOIC, I think the industry's in really safe and exciting hands.
Oh, thanks, John.
So thank you so much. And thank you for joining us today. It's been fantastic and fascinating to learn about you and to get your views, and your passion clearly shines through. So Thank you, Grace.
Thank you, John. It's always a joy to see you.
A huge thank you for watching our podcast, Death, A Changing Industry. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel as we have some fascinating guests lined up. Thank you so much.